Merry Christmas everyone, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be taking a deep dive into each of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC Fight Night Song versus Gutierrez from a betting perspective. Hopefully you'll be able to use the information in this video to make better betting decisions, maybe even earn some extra cash. All the information that I'm going to be sharing with you in these breakdowns is backed up by hours and hours and hours of fight research, as well as 15 years of experience making money betting on the UFC. So we're going to be diving into those fights in just a moment. Don't forget, if you like the breakdown videos for the fights we're going to be talking about in this YouTube video, you can also find breakdown videos just like these ones for all the prelim fights over on my website, MMABettingTips.com. You'll find the link for that in the description below. Before we jump into breaking down these fights, I want to give a big shout out to Mr. Tazrukian. It came through for us in a big way last weekend. I don't bet big favourites in the UFC very often, as you can see from the average odds of fighters I bet. It's very, very rare that I will bet on a really big favourite in the UFC. In fact, we've only bet on two big favourites in the last 20 bets that I've placed. Miranda Maverick to beat Priscilla Cachoeira, she came through for us, and then Arman Tazrukian coming through for us last weekend. I don't like to bet big favourites in UFC just because, at the end of the day, it's a really chaotic sport. We've got bad judges, flash knockouts, Hail Mary submissions, disqualifications, injuries, all that kind of stuff. But every once in a while, a bet comes along, or a fight comes along, where even though one of the fighters is a big favourite, when you look at the matchup stylistically, the big favourite has virtually no way to lose outside of something insane happens like an injury or a disqualification. That's obviously, how I felt Tazrukian matched up with Dariush based on all the stuff we said in last week's breakdown video. So this year continues to be an amazing year for pre-fight betting. As you can see, we had this nice big run up 3 years ago, and then hit this nasty period of break even where just couldn't work out why we were floating around break even for a long period of time. So around about this time here, where we had this nasty losing month, I analysed all my bets, my performance from this period here, and made some changes based on some trends that I discovered in terms of types of bets that were costing me money, and types of bets I was performing really well on. I basically eliminated betting the kind of bets that were costing me money. I doubled down on the kind of bets I was performing really well on, and the end result has been turning our profits around to the extent where now our profitability chart looks like this, and this doesn't even include the win on Tazrukian. So at the end of December, if we've made a profit, obviously Tazrukian bet would put us up here somewhere. So it's been an amazing year. We've only had 2 losing months in the whole of 2023, back in June and then right at the beginning of the year in February. Outside of that, it's been a money train. We've done really well. We've also done well live betting the UFC. As you can see, we make a profit almost every month live betting the UFC. And that is our big cash cow. We make a profit on 75% of fight night cards. So head on over to my website, MMABettingTips.com, check out what we do, join the Discord channel, and yeah, give live betting a try. I think you'd love it. Check out the pre-fight bets. I think you'd love them too. Obviously, I share as much as I can on these YouTube videos, but every once in a while, we get bets on the prelims and stuff that I don't have time to cover in these YouTube videos. For example, Gutierrez, any others? Lasindu probably wasn't covered on the channel. Don't know about the others. I can't remember if Maverick was on the prelims or not. Anyway, give it a try. There's loads of other bets as well on the site, over unders, all that kind of stuff. Give it a try. Think you'll like it. Now let's jump into the first fight that I want to break down in today's video. It's going to be the main event between Chris Gutierrez and Yadong Song. I'm a big fan of both of these guys, but unfortunately I do think it's a very difficult stylistic matchup for Chris Gutierrez, and that's reflected in the odds. Song Yadong, pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.27, which is minus 370 for an implied probability of 79%. If we take a look at the odds on Chris Gutierrez, he's around an average of 3.95, which is going to be plus 295 for an implied probability of 25%. Let me zoom in a bit there. So Gutierrez is 32 years old, 5'9" with a 67-inch reach. Yadong Song, 26 years old, 5'8" with a 67-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. Nothing major going on in terms of age either. And yeah, it's just a very difficult stylistic matchup for Gutierrez. Gutierrez is one of these guys that is very good at one particular thing. And in fact, he's good at a couple of things. But outside of those couple of things that he's very, very, very good at, there's not a whole lot more to his game. So when a guy like Gutierrez faces someone like Yadong Song, there's a very dynamic fighter. There's very high level in lots of different areas. It's very difficult for a guy like Chris Gutierrez to compete because his paths to victory are very narrow. There's only one or two things he can do that really give him an edge over his opponents. And if you take away those advantages, there's not a lot else there. So if we talk about how these two match up in terms of striking and grappling, I guess grappling's kind of the easiest thing to cover because we know that Gutierrez's takedown offense is very bad and he's very, very weak off his back. Gutierrez is one of these guys that, because he's quite athletic, because he's got pretty good balance, initially he can be a little bit tricky to get down, but if you do take him to the ground, he's one of these guys that just kind of lies on his back and has absolutely no idea how to get back up to his feet. Now, Yadong Song is predominantly a striker, but he has been trained at Team Alpha Male for a long time, and we've seen massive improvements to Song's both defensive and offensive wrestling in the last couple of years, where now, when he first came to the UFC and when he first started training at Team Alpha Male, he was a bit like Gutierrez, very much just, just a striker, not a lot else to his game. But what we've seen from Song last couple of years, he's developed decent MMA grappling to the point where I think it's possible he could use a grappling heavy game plan this weekend against Gutierrez to take Gutierrez down, beat him up on the ground, win very easily. I doubt he will because Song's one of these guys that loves to stand and bang and put on exciting fights. So he's probably going to want to keep his standing. But, if he did want to grapple, I think this would be an easy night's work for him. So Yadong Song, big advantage when it comes to grappling. Also on that note, earlier in Song's career, if you made him grapple a little bit, he'd gas out quite quickly. Like in the first sort of couple of years of Song's career in the UFC, his cardio was pretty bad. But as well as his MMA grappling improving exponentially at Team Alpha Male, his conditioning, his cardio has as well. So he doesn't really slow down anywhere near as much as he used to. So that's not really going to be an issue in this fight either. Now, in terms of striking, both guys are primarily strikers. This is where things get a little bit more complicated to work out. But generally speaking, Chris Gutierrez doesn't really have any boxing. His boxing's not the best. He has a kick-based style of striking, so he doesn't really have any power in his hands. Even though he's not the best when it comes to boxing offensively, doesn't really have any power in his hands, doesn't really land damaging, impactful punches. The aspect of Gutierrez's boxing, which is very good, is his defense. His striking defense is absolutely brilliant. His footwork, his movement's great. At times he's like a ghost in there. He's so good at staying just outside the range where he can be hit, and he's very, very good at reading his opponents. So Gutierrez not the best offensively when it comes to boxing, but defensively brilliant. Gutierrez's biggest strength is his kicking game. Now, to be honest, he's an unusual one. He doesn't really generate too much power with his body kicks or head kicks. His leg kicks are obviously his biggest weapon. We've seen him get stoppages with leg kicks in the past, and his leg kicks are absolutely devastating. He can end fights with them. He inflicts a lot of damage with them. But really speaking, offensively, there's not a whole lot else there to worry about. Body kicks, leg kicks, not particularly good. Boxing, offensively, not particularly good. You take away the leg kicks, there's not a lot to worry about here with Gutierrez. And while he has had a lot of success hammering the legs of these low-level guys and putting on, some really impressive performances, I think Gutierrez is one of these guys that, because his range of attacks is so limited, as he starts to face a higher level of opponent now, guys like Yadong Song, who are a lot more well-rounded. I hate to use the word exposed. It's a horrible, despicable word that all these clickbaity YouTubers use to get clicks and views, or some exposed. I really dislike the word exposed. I think it's a nasty little word. That's quite. It doesn't make people feel good when they, people are like, oh, someone's exposed. I don't want to say Gutierrez will get exposed, but what I mean to say is, I think Gutierrez is really going to struggle to have the same level of success he had against, top 10, top 15 guys in the division as he had against the guys that he's maybe faced over the last 18 months to 2 years. And I think we'll see that on Saturday night. Yadong Song's a big step up in competition for Gutierrez. So in terms of how these two match up, Gutierrez is a pretty easy fighter to game plan for. And we know that Yadong Song training at a gym like Team Alpha Male with world-class coaches, they're very good at game planning and strategy. So when you look at Chris Gutierrez, one of the things that does make him very beatable, and one of the reasons why he's going to struggle so much against these top 10, top 15 guys, is that outside of the leg kicks, he doesn't really bring a whole lot to the table. If you're Uriah Faber, developing a game plan and strategy, training Song, preparing him to go out there and beat Gutierrez this weekend, it's a very easy job. Because if you look at what Gutierrez brings to the table, he doesn't really have knockout power. His offensive boxing's not the best. He's not going to try and take you down. And you know the range he likes to fight in. And you know what his weaknesses are. You know his takedown offense is bad. You know he doesn't react particularly well to pressure. And you know if you don't fight him in that kickboxing range where he can kind of chip away at you with the leg kicks, he struggles to actually land the leg kicks. Whenever we've seen him really on the back foot under pressure, can't really get them off. And when you see guys stand off and leave a large space in between, in between themselves and Gutierrez, very difficult for him to close the distance and get inside to land the kicks, as well as he doesn't really have the boxing to get respect in there and set it up. So if you're Uriah Faber, very easy to game plan a win this weekend. The way that you beat Gutierrez is you just take away the leg kicks, and the biggest and best way to do that is exactly the same way that Pedro Muniz did it. Did we bet Pedro Muniz to beat Chris Gutierrez? I think we might have. I certainly live bet Muniz. Oh, we did. Boom. Check that out. Yeah, so we actually bet on Pedro Muniz as a big underdog to beat Chris Gutierrez. I'd completely forgotten about that because there's only so much hard drive space. I watch so many fights every week, 30-40 hours of fights every week, that very quickly you move on in your mind because you don't really have time to remember what just happened. You've always got to move on to the next thing. So yeah, we bet Muniz to beat Gutierrez. And the reason why we bet Muniz, even though he was a pretty big favourite, is because Muniz is a pressure fighter with a striking base in boxing. And the problem with guys like Chris Gutierrez is in order to get their leg kicking game off, they need time and space to set their feet to uncork the kick. And one of the ways you can take that time and space away from them is to pressure them and put them on the back foot, where they're forced to kind of circle away from you a lot in order to be able to set their feet and get their kicks off. But if you're pretty good at maintaining pressure and you can just continually come forward and pressure your opponent, like Pedro Muniz is very good at doing, it like dramatically reduces the volume of strikes that Gutierrez can throw and land, simply because, well, he ain't getting the time and space to get his kicks off. And so what we know about Yadong Song is, I wouldn't necessarily say Yadong Song is as relentless of a pressure fighter as Muniz is. We've all got memories of Muniz from his fights over the years, literally just taking control of the centre of the octagon, blocking punches with his face and smothering his opponents in pressure. Yadong Song isn't necessarily that kind of pressure fighter, but Yadong Song is certainly a very aggressive guy that likes to come forward and engage you, and he's aggressive, he puts a lot of pressure on you. And the real issue for Chris Gutierrez in this matchup is that he fights with his hands down low, chin up high, and he relies on his tremendous ability to read his opponents, to use footwork and head movement to kind of slip shots and evade strikes and get out the way. And he's very, very good at doing it. But the thing about Yadong Song is he's very good at covering distance quickly. He's very accurate with his boxing. He's got true legit knockout power in his hands. And he also isn't the kind of guy that's going to be deterred from coming forward just because he eats a few leg kicks. We know he's tough as nails. We've seen him in a lot of wars. I mean, the amount of damage he took against Corey Sandhagen, still continue to keep fighting, says a lot about how tough Yadong Song is. And generally speaking, we know the Chinese fighters are absolute dogs that are bloody tough, right? They're very tough as nails. Think about all the Chinese fighters in the UFC. They are absolute warriors, right? And, you know, Yadong Song's no different. So I don't think leg kicks are going to, you know, even though not taking anything away from Gutierrez, his leg kicks are devastating. But I think it's going to take a lot more than leg kicks to stop Yadong Song from coming forward this weekend. And I just think Yadong Song's forward pressure, aggression, power, ability to land hard and more impactful shots. I just think this fight is absolute hell for Gutierrez. And you know what they say, the best counter to a leg kick is a punch in the face. Yadong Song pretty good at punching guys in the face. So personally, I think this is a dreadful fight for Mr. Gutierrez. I think he's in a lot of trouble this weekend. Stylistically, it's not good for him. I think if he starts chipping away at the legs of Yadong Song, that'll ramp up the aggression levels from Song to the point where he'll come forward even more aggressively, which will put Gutierrez under even more pressure on the outside to the point where he'll have even less space to get those kicks off. So yeah, I like Yadong Song a lot in this fight. Unfortunately, his odds are too steep for me to bet on him. He is a bit reckless. He doesn't really check leg kicks or address leg kicks, so Gutierrez will land them. It's very unlikely Gutierrez wins this weekend, but I don't like Yadong Song enough to consider betting him at these odds. I mean, we've already said that we don't bet many big favourites in the UFC. This is just too steep for me. Far too steep. In terms of the over-under on this one, both guys are tough. The odds are in the even money odds range. You can see why the odds are set for this fight to go very deep. If you look at Gutierrez's record, he's a bit of a decision-ater. And Yadong Song, to be fair, despite how dangerous he is, you know, he frequently goes deep in fights as well. You know, round 5, round 4, you know, some decisions here. Yeah, it's tricky. I do feel both guys are tough, so there's a decent chance it goes deep, but I also feel that it could quickly descend into a bit of a checkmate matchup where Gutierrez doesn't really have anything for Song Yadong, and he's forced to kind of stand and bang with a superior boxer with big power in his hands. And because he's not going to be particularly good at dealing with the relentless pressure Song Yadong might put him under, I think Gutierrez could eat a bomb and get knocked out in this. Like I say, it's a big step up in competition for him. You look at the guys he's kind of been facing: Haile Alateng, Pedro Muniz, almost 40 years old, Frankie Edgar, 40 years old, Dana Baccarel, Felipe Colares, Andre Ewell. Big step up now to go to, you know, Yadong Song, and I think we're going to see Gutierrez get slapped back down a little bit. Just showed that he's not quite good enough for that top 10 picture just yet. But, you know, 32 years old, he's quite old as well. And he's also had, you know, a lot of fights. So, yeah, I think Gutierrez is a decent fighter. I just don't think he's that top tier, you know, top tier type of guy that, you know, will ever really be in the title picture. Whereas Yadong Song, only 26 years old, he's improving at an insanely fast rate. And I'm quite high on this guy. I think he's very good. In terms of prop bets, wow, the odds are very steep on Yadong Song by knockout or TKO. Also pretty steep on him to win by decision. So yeah, odds a bit dead on that fight. Odds are very steep. I wouldn't bother with either of those. I would give them a pass. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Anthony Smith against Khalil Rountree. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Rountree is the favourite at average odds of around 1.48, which is going to be minus 208 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Anthony Smith, he's around an average of 2.65, which is going to be plus 165 for an implied probability of 38%. So Smith, 35 years old, 6'4", with a 76-inch reach. Khalil Rountree, 33 years old, 6'1", with a 76.5-inch reach. So on paper, both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, nothing too major there. But an X factor that I do feel it is important to talk about is the number of fights that Anthony Smith has got. you know, he's approaching 60 pro fights, which is an insane number of fights considering Anthony Smith, for a big chunk of his UFC career, has also been competing against the very best fighters in the world at both middleweight and light heavyweight. So we've seen Anthony Smith in a lot of wars. You know, we've seen him in a war against Hector Lombard. We've seen him get his teeth knocked out against Glover Teixeira. We've seen him get rocked, wobbled, dropped multiple times in his past fights. And so Anthony Smith isn't particularly old for a light heavyweight at 35, but he does have a lot of miles on the clock. And I always use the analogy of a car. If you've got a 1-year-old car with 100,000 miles on the clock, or a 10-year-old car with 1,000 miles on the clock, even though the 10-year-old car is a lot older than the 1-year-old car, the 10-year-old car is probably going to be a lot more reliable because it hasn't had as much wear and tear put on the engine and the components. And so even though, you know, on paper, Khalil Rountree and Anthony Smith are kind of the same, 60 pro fights is a lot. And it's not like those 60 pro fights have been against a low level of opponent or fights that have ended pretty quick. You know, Smith's had a lot of injuries, taken a lot of damage, been a lot of wars, and I think it's really starting to show. For me, Anthony Smith is a fighter that for many years now has been on a really, really steep decline. I think he's looked very bad for a very long time. You know, he's managed to pick up some wins here and there against relatively low-level opponents, in my opinion, but I would not be backing Anthony Smith to beat anyone in the division at this stage in his career. Because when I look at him, you know, I always say the only place you'll find truth and honesty in this game is the fight footage, because the fight footage really doesn't lie, right? When we looked at footage of Kelvin Gastelum last week, we saw how bad his takedown offense, his ground game was, and we saw what Sean Brady did to him. The fight footage doesn't lie. And when I look at Anthony Smith, to me, he just looks like a fighter on a very steep decline, and that's okay, right? I don't want to take shots at Smith or be negative towards him or dig at him in any way. He's had a great career, you know what I mean? He's been in the title picture. He's been a top 5 light heavyweight for a good chunk of the last few years. He's got a job now in the UFC as a pundit, as an analyst. He's got great podcasts with Bisbing. Smith seems like a great guy, but all good things come to an end. He is in the tail end of his career, and a lot of the time when we're talking about, you know, a fighter's decline, or how many miles a fighter's got on a clock, or whether Father Time's caught up to them yet, sometimes it's a little bit preemptive and we're having to speculate. Whereas other times we get absolute confirmation that it has happened, and I believe Smith fits into the category of fighter that it has absolutely happened to, where he's just very slow these days. I mean, he was never the quickest fighter, but very slow to react. Reflexes look off. Times it looks like he's fighting underwater with how slow he is, and he just looks very fragile at this stage in his career. So this is an interesting stylistic matchup because there's a lot of issues with both these guys. Like, I'm being very harsh, very critical of Smith, which I don't like to be, because I respect the hell out of Smith. He's an incredible fighter. He's had an amazing career. But there's a lot of issues with both these guys, and for that reason it is an interesting fight. But I definitely favour Rountree here. Let's talk about how they match up stylistically, and then perhaps the things that I'm saying about both these two will make a little more sense to you. So, start off with cardio. You know, Rountree is a guy that if you make him work hard, he will slow down as the fight wears on. But you have to make him work hard in order for that to happen. And typically speaking, Smith isn't one of these guys that makes his opponents work particularly hard. He's quite happy to stand in kickboxing range and have a nice friendly striking match. He's not the kind of guy that's going to be trying to take Rountree down or, like, you know, force him to engage or put a lot of pressure on him. In actual fact, I think if Smith did do that, it might not be a good idea anyway, because he's so slow and so bad defensively at this stage in his career that it would leave him wide open to, you know, the devastating sniper-like counters that Rountree could throw back at him. Because we know even though Rountree fades if you make him work hard, he also fades because he's not one of these guys that will back down. He'll always meet you head on, and, you know, sometimes he fades because of that. But I think against a guy like Smith, who's as slow as Smith, I think there'd be a really good chance Rountree would catch him with a big counter strike and knock him out. So I mean, let's talk about grappling first of all. We can get on to striking, which is a little bit more complex. Let's talk about grappling. So, it's no secret that Khalil Rountree has really bad takedown offense and absolutely no ground game at all. Right, Rountree is one of these guys that has been a bit lucky, to be fair, to not face more grapplers in his time in the UFC. Because whenever we have seen Rountree face grapplers, I mean, his takedown offense is non-existent, and he's looked like a white belt on the ground. I mean, it doesn't look like he's ever even been to a BJJ class. Totally hopeless ground game. But I think because Rountree is such an exciting fighter to watch, such a brilliant striker, so skilled at what he does, I think the UFC matchmakers have kind of thrown him a bone and accepted, if we match this guy up against grapplers, we're going to get some pretty boring fights where he's just going to get taken down and controlled very easily. But if we match this guy up against strikers, we're going to get, exciting stand-up wars. We're going to get, big knockouts, which is why, in recent years, you don't really see, we don't really see Rountree face any grapplers, right? Dorcas, striker. Jacoby, kickboxer. Carl Roberson, kickboxer. Bukauskas, well-rounded, but never tries to take anyone down. Pratnio, striker. You've got to go all the way back to 2019, 4 years ago, for the last time Rountree fought someone with a base in grappling. And ironically, he was taken down and finished, very quickly in round 1. And the UFC probably learned after that, well, we get way more value for money out of this guy if we just match him up against strikers, and then he's going to give us really exciting highlight reel finishes, which are going to entertain the fans. After all, it's the WWE now, baby. This is an entertainment business. So, if I were Anthony Smith's coaches this weekend, I would be saying, if we try and stand and strike with Rountree, who's faster, more explosive, more athletic, more accurate, better technically, it probably isn't going to end very well for us. If we kind of struggled on the feet against a guy like Ryan Spann, going up against someone as technical and dangerous as Rountree on the feet is going to be an absolute nightmare. Anthony Smith's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He's going to be levels and levels and levels and levels above Khalil Rountree on the ground. I would be saying to Smith, we need to not even be thinking about striking in this fight. You've got better cardio than this guy, significantly better grappling. You need to protect your brain cells and give yourself the best chance of winning this weekend by using a grappling heavy game plan. And that would be my message to Smith. Now, where this fight gets really interesting is that Smith's offensive wrestling isn't very good because he's stiff and he's slow, and because of that, he struggles to close the distance and get in on his opponents and tie him up. His takedown entries aren't the best. So Smith doesn't really have any offensive wrestling, so he never really tries to take guys down, which is why at times you see Smith pull guard in fights, because I think his big lack of offensive wrestling means that if he wants to be on the ground, often pulling guard is really his only option of getting it there. But Rountree, his takedown offense is so bad that you would think that a guy like Smith with almost 60 pro fights, that's trained for as long as he has, would be able to find a way to get the fight to the ground. And on the ground, Smith has a huge advantage. Don't get me wrong, there's issues with Smith's ground game. His own takedown offense is bad. He is very weak off his back. But ultimately, it doesn't matter how bad Smith is on the ground. All it matters is what Smith's ground game is like relative to Rowntree's. And because Rountree is so bad on the ground, Smith just has a huge advantage there. So if Smith were to come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, he'd stand a very good chance of winning. Now, of course, he could get caught with a big shot, knocked out on the way in while looking for a takedown. These things can always happen. But, the probability of him winning this weekend is far higher if he uses a grappling heavy game plan. Now, in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, I think it's a very bad stylistic matchup for Smith. It's possible that he could make Rountree work really hard in round 1, adrenaline dump, survive round 1, and then take over in rounds 2 and 3 when Rountree may start to fade. But I think Smith is going to have to take a lot of damage and go through absolute hell in round 1 for that to be a realistic possibility and not ideal. Grappling would be a lot easier, a lot better for his health, probably a lot better for his face as well. So yeah, this is one of those matchups where on the feet, I think it goes very bad for Smith. He's slow, his reflexes are shot. Rountree is lightning fast, legit KO power in every strike, devastating kicks. I think this is a very bad stylistic matchup for Smith if it stays striking. So in terms of how I see this fight from a betting point of view, my lean is definitely Rountree. There's no way, no doubt about it. Unfortunately, in the odds range that Rountree is in, I can't bet him, because the only way that I would bet a guy in Rountree's odds range is if they were absolutely rock solid with no major weaknesses. I mean, if you look at the guys we've been betting in Rountree's odds range, Tazrukian, in my opinion, significantly better than Dariush everywhere, aside from pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which wouldn't really impact that fight because of how good Tazrukian's takedown defensive wrestling is. Godinez significantly better than Tabor of the Richie everywhere. Jacqueline Buckley significantly better than Alex Morono everywhere. Lucindo significantly better than Poliano Viana everywhere. Maverick significantly better than Priscilla Cachoeira everywhere. So you guys kind of get to understand where my strategy lies, right? I'm only going to be betting a guy in this odds range if I feel he is significantly better than his opponent almost everywhere. And in this matchup, that isn't the case, because we know Smith's got a big advantage on the ground, and we also know Smith's got a big advantage when it comes to cardio. So for that reason, I can't touch Rountree, because he's too steep of a favourite given his weaknesses. Having said that, I don't think Smith is particularly well positioned to exploit both of those weaknesses, because I think he'll struggle to get Rountree to the ground because of how bad his offensive wrestling is and the fact that Smith never really tries to get his opponents down. And also, I think in order for Rountree to slow in this fight, Smith's going to have to put himself in a lot of danger to make Rountree work. I think if he did that, he'd probably just get knocked out. So on that basis, bloody difficult fight for Smith this weekend. My lean's Rountree, too steep of a favourite for me to bet on him though. In terms of the over-under on this fight, I'm just not interested. I could see Anthony Smith getting knocked out in 30 seconds here. I could see Rountree slipping, ending up on the bottom, getting choked out within 2 minutes. I could also see, a 3-round war of attrition where Smith's just too damn tough. Rountree can't get him out of there. So yeah, man, I'm not interested in the over-under. This fight is like, there's lots of different ways this fight could go. In terms of props, I think the most likely outcome is Rountree by knockout, but the odds are absolutely terrible, so you can't bet that. I don't really like a lot else, to be honest with you. Yeah, I don't like a lot else. I mean, the odds are kind of generous on Rountree by decision. I don't love it. I think Smith gets knocked out. I hope I'm wrong. I like Smith. He's a nice guy, but not a great stylistic matchup for him. This one's for the Just Bleed boys. I love them knockouts. It's a good stylistic matchup for Rountree, this. So, yeah, I hope you found that useful. If you did, of course, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already, because that would help me out a lot. Would really appreciate it. So now let's break down this next fight, which is going to be Sumudaerji against Tim Elliott. So we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one. We can see that Tim Elliott is the favourite. Average odds are around 1.74, which is minus 135 for an implied probability of 57%. That's super interesting because Elliott is coming in on literally 5 or 6 days notice. I think this fight was announced on Tuesday. It's kind of wild that Elliott is the favourite, but he's taking on Sumudaerji, who is around an average of 2.10, which is plus 110 for an implied probability of 48%. So Sumudaerji, 27 years old, 5'8", with a 72-inch reach. Tim Elliott, 36 years old, 5'7", with a 66-inch reach. So there's a few X factors on this fight, right? We've already mentioned the first one, Tim Elliott stepping up on short notice, 5-6 days notice. We're going to be talking a lot about that in this breakdown video, because for me, it's a big deal in the context of this fight, because Elliott is the kind of guy that is quite open at this stage in his career about being motivated by money. And I don't know what Elliott's contract is. I'm assuming he's on like 30k show, 30k win, maybe 50k show, 50k wins, or how long he's been around, something like that. But he's going to be 37 years old next week, or in a couple weeks. Pretty soon he's going to be 37, which is really, really, really old for a flyweight. The lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes, and athleticism. Tim Elliott is in the tail end of his career. I don't think he's made a whole lot of money in his life. He's very open about the fact that he's motivated by money. So, if the UFC were to phone a guy like Tim Elliott up, if they were to call Elliott earlier this week and be like, because you've got to remember as well, this fight is taking place in the Apex Center in Las Vegas, and I'm pretty sure Tim Elliott lives and trains in Las Vegas. He was in Missouri for a bit, he was in Arizona for a bit, but I think he's in Las Vegas now. So if, you know, on like Sunday or Monday of this week, the UFC matchmakers got the call that Alan Nascimento had pulled out, they're probably like, well, the fight week proceedings start Tuesday. We've only found out Alan Nascimento's pulled out like Monday. They're going to be thinking, you know, what flyweights are available to step in on short notice that kind of live in the California, Vegas area, because ideally they'd have to report to the Fighter Hotel Tuesday for all like the fight week prep to start, all the promotional stuff, the weight cutting, the media interviews, all that kind of stuff, right? So if Elliott's in Vegas or California or Arizona, I think it's too far from Vegas, you know, he might have been one of the first guys that they call. And, you know, irrespective of what shape Tim Elliott is in at the moment, you know, he's 37 years old next week, sorry. He's had over 30 pro fights. He's very open these days about being motivated by money. He's probably thinking to himself, well, look, he's probably thinking, I've won 2 of my last 3 fights, 4 of my last 6 fights, which means if I lose against Sumudaerji, I'm not really at risk of being cut. Even though I might not be in the best shape right now, you know, I haven't got too many fights left in me. I've got to be realistic. I'm a 37-year-old flyweight. It's not a terrible stylistic matchup for me, because Sumudaerji's grappling's not great, and we'll get into that in a minute. Elliott strikes me as the kind of guy that would step up on 5-6 days notice, even if he was in terrible shape, because he probably just gets a bag of cash for doing it, and he probably doesn't care that much at this stage in his career whether he wins or loses. Obviously he's going to want to win, but if he loses, not like he's at risk of getting cut. By getting cut, I mean released from his contract in the promotion, because he's performed reasonably well over the last few years. And not like it's going to like really impact his career in any way, because he's not in the title picture anyway, so a loss doesn't really affect him in the rankings to the extent where it's going to hold his career aspirations back. So Elliott is one of these guys that I think might actually be coming in this weekend in terrible shape on just 5-6 days notice. And I made a big deal of that, made a big point of that, because when you research this fight, it's actually a brilliant stylistic matchup for Tim Elliott, and I'm really, really tempted to bet him. And you know what? If Elliott was coming into this fight on a full camp, I would almost definitely bet him, because it is just such a good stylistic matchup. But knowing the kind of guy Tim Elliott is, I would not trust him to show up in fight-ready shape this weekend. I could absolutely see Elliott just showing up for a payday, and I wouldn't blame him. And if I were in his position, I'd probably do the same thing. You know, 37 years old, 30 pro fights. His career's going to be coming to an end soon. If you can turn up on Saturday night, get 50 grand, do you know what I mean, for doing what you probably do in the gym every day anyway, why wouldn't you do that? You know what I mean? Why wouldn't you do it? It's not doing any harm to anyone. You know, the UFC's happy, the fight's filled, Sumudaerji's happy, he's got an opponent, he still gets to fight, the fans are happy, they get a fight to watch on Saturday night. Elliott's happy, he might get 50 grand. You know what I mean? So, and who knows, he might win, which is an even bigger bonus, and I wouldn't rule it out because this is a good stylistic matchup for him. But yeah, as much as Tim Elliott is a very tempting bet this weekend, I can't bet him because I worry he's just turning up for a payday. But stylistically, this is a really good stylistic matchup for him. Classic striker versus grappler matchup. Sumudaerji is the striker, Elliott is the grappler, and we'll go into just a moment why it's a good stylistic matchup for Elliott. Let's just finish off by just finishing off the tail of the tape. Sumudaerji 5'8", 72-inch reach, Elliott 5'7", 66-inch reach. So that's a massive 6-inch reach advantage for Sumudaerji, which statistically gives him around about a 65% chance of winning. We already know Sumudaerji has got a big advantage on the feet, or if you didn't know that, you do now. And that 6-inch reach advantage is just going to accentuate the edge that Sumudaerji has over striking versus Tim Elliott. And in terms of the age, there is pretty much a 10-year age gap between these two, with Elliott being 37 years old next week. So statistically speaking, the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 10-year age gap in a fight. So even though stylistically this is a very good matchup for Tim Elliott, all of the X factors are going against him because Sumudaerji has a big reach advantage, he's a lot younger, and of course Elliott coming on just 5, 6, 7 days notice, absolute max. So this is one of those interesting matchups where when you focus on what's happening in the octagon, it's a great fight for Elliott. When you focus on everything that's happening outside the octagon, very, very tough fight for Tim Elliott. In terms of how they match up stylistically, let's focus on striking first of all, because that's going to be the easiest thing to cover. Tim Elliott gets absolutely smoked on the feet. There's no doubt in my mind at all that Sumudaerji will light Elliott up bad, and if the fight stays standing, this will be a very, very tough night for Tim Elliott. We know that Tim Elliott doesn't really have any power in his hands. He struggles to get respect in the octagon because he just doesn't land particularly damaging or impactful shots. He just doesn't have any power. He's pretty bad defensively. He's got that sloppy style. You know, he's unorthodox. He's awkward. But whenever we see Elliott face a really technical striker, he gets lit up. And Sumudaerji is a very technical striker. He's got great footwork, great movement. He uses his length well. Throws a really diverse range of strikes, a high volume of strikes. He's a sniper on the feet. I think every second that this fight is on the feet, Elliott is going to be getting lit up like a fucking Christmas tree. It is not going to be fun for Tim Elliott to stand and strike with Sumudaerji this weekend. Now, when it comes to grappling, things get really interesting because Sumudaerji's takedown defense is pretty bad. And he's also pretty weak off his back. So Sumudaerji is pretty easy to take down. And on his back, pretty easy to hold down and control as well. Which obviously makes this a great fight for Tim Elliott, because Tim Elliott is primarily a grappler. He's built a career off grappling. His offensive wrestling's pretty good. He's got a nasty submission game. He's very tricky, very unorthodox on the ground. My one issue with Tim Elliott, no, I've got a lot of issues with Tim Elliott, but my biggest issue with Tim Elliott, I don't have an issue with Tim Elliott, I love Tim Elliott, he's a legend, but my issue with Elliott's style of fighting is that he's one of these grapplers who has two big issues with his grappling, maybe three big issues. I'll definitely name two, maybe we'll have a third as well. The first big issue with Tim Elliott's grappling is really through no fault of his own. You know, he just doesn't really have any physicality to his grappling at all. So where we talk about Elliott not having any power in his hands to hurt his opponents with impactful strikes, unfortunately for Elliott, that also translates into his grappling, where he just doesn't have particularly strong grappling control. You know, you see some of these grapplers that have that crushing physicality where once they get a hold of you, they can just kind of hold you down and you can't shake them off, you can't move, right? Elliott doesn't really have that. His grappling control is not great. So while his offensive wrestling is pretty good, he's pretty good at getting guys to the ground, he often struggles to hold them down because he just doesn't have that physicality. So it's often quite easy for them to create space for themselves on the ground and scramble back up to their feet. Now, that might not be the case this weekend with Sumudaerji, because Sumudaerji is very weak off his back. He's not particularly good at working his way back up to his feet. He kind of just lies on his back doing a whole lot of nothing if you take him down. However, he is very young and should be making big improvements from fight to fight. So maybe he'll look a lot better in that department this weekend. So that's the first issue with Elliott's grappling. He lacks physicality. The second issue with Tim Elliott's grappling, and this is completely self-inflicted, is that he just doesn't settle on the ground. He makes a lot of mistakes on the ground. So if you don't have the best grappling control, you want to work as hard as you can on the ground to take all space away from your opponent on the ground so that they can't improve their position and work their way back up to their feet. Tim Elliott is one of these guys that makes life very difficult for himself because he doesn't have particularly good grappling control, and he also just gives his opponents tons of space on the ground to work their way back up to their feet. At times, he'll work hard for a takedown, land some ground and pound for 30-40 seconds, and then let his opponent stand back up. It's almost like he's got some kind of, like, I don't know what I would call it. I don't want to call it a mental weakness, but or maybe a lapse in concentration. I don't know what it is, but some guys just can't settle and maintain a position. They've got to be doing something. It's almost like if Tim Elliott hits a takedown and he gets into top position and he's landing ground and pound for 30-40 seconds, it's almost like he's got a self-destructive tendency where he acknowledges that he's in a good position and he's doing well. So he's got to kind of self-sabotage himself a little bit by letting his opponent back up, or at the very least giving him a little bit of space to potentially give them an opportunity to get back up, so that he kind of faces some adversity again in the fight. It's almost like Elliott's one of these guys that whenever things are going too well for him in a fight, he has to do something himself to make life more difficult for himself. And I see that a lot in Elliott on the ground, where he just gives his opponents way too much space by getting overly aggressive with ground and pound, or jumping on a long shot submission instead of just maintaining position, or yeah, it's just, he gives up position a lot. And again, it won't necessarily matter with Sumudaerji because of how weak Sumudaerji is off his back, but if Sumudaerji has made some improvements and shows more urgency to pop back up to his feet than he usually would, then that could really cost him Elliott in this fight. Can we think of a third issue with Elliott's grappling? He doesn't have the best grappling IQ, to be fair. Like I touched on just a moment ago, he does give up position a lot, hunting for long shot submissions, or you know, just being impatient on the ground basically, and that's not good. So look, as we sum this one up from a stylistic point of view, if Elliott fights smart and he's in good shape, good fight condition, I think he gives Sumudaerji absolute hell. The problem with betting this fight is that Elliott may not show up in good shape because he's coming on such short notice, and he also is not he doesn't have the best fight IQ. He does make a lot of mistakes in fights, and if Sumudaerji's improved a little bit, that could really cost him, especially if Elliott gets tired because he's not in the best fight shape. So yeah, that's how I see this fight. You know, my lean is definitely Elliott. I think Elliott is much more likely to win. If Elliott was coming on a full camp, I would bet him at these odds, no doubt about it. But the short notice thing gives me the heebie-jeebies. So I've got to pass on this one. In terms of the over-under, very likely this fight goes deep. Neither guy is, both guys are pretty tough. I think Elliott's more likely to win, and he's not really a finisher, so more likely it goes the distance, which is interesting because that's in the underdog odds range at the moment, which suggests, the bookies think it's more likely to end inside the distance, which I would disagree with, but I'm not going to be betting the over-under on this fight because we don't know what condition Elliott is showing up in. And in terms of props, Elliott by decision is the most likely outcome. The odds aren't great, so it's up to you whether you would want to pay the price on that or not. Pretty steep odds. Hope you found that breakdown useful. Again, if you did, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already, as we now go into the next fight, which is going to be Jamie Mullarkey against Nasrat Haqparast. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Haqparast is the favourite at average odds of around 1.52, which is going to be minus 192 for an implied probability of 66%. We take a look at the odds on Mullarkey. He is around an average of 2.60, which is going to be plus 160 for an implied probability of 38%. So Mullarkey is 29 years old, 6 foot tall with a 74-inch reach, and Haqparast is 28 years old, 5'10", with a 72-inch reach. So in terms of the tail of the tape, both pretty much the same, to be fair. Mullarkey a little bit taller, a little bit longer, but nothing major, to be honest with you. Both guys should be roughly the same size on fight night. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, they're both primarily strikers. They both will occasionally try to take their opponents down, but you don't see too much grappling from either guy, despite the fact that in the Haqparast picture here, he's mounted his opponent. Both of them will grapple from time to time, but for the most part, both these guys like to stand and bang. So I would expect this to be, for the most part, a stand-up fight, because even if one of them did try to get the other down, both of them are quite difficult to hold down, and neither of them are particularly good offensive wrestlers. So I don't think either of them are the level of offensive wrestling they would need to be in order to hold the other down. I hope that makes sense. Therefore, I would expect this to be a stand-up fight. If it is a stand-up fight, I definitely favour Haqparast. He's a more technical striker. His footwork is better. His movement is better. His defence is not necessarily better. Haqparast likes to stand in the pocket and roll with the punches, which means he does take quite a bit of damage. He loves to stand and bang, but he's certainly more technical than Mullarkey. What I would say about Haqparast... So basically, I'm going to keep this breakdown very short, because it's not really a whole lot to talk about with this fight. So this is one of those matchups where you've got two strikers, and Haqparast is definitely the better striker. There's no doubt about that. He's got better footwork, better movement, he's more technical. Where this fight gets difficult from a betting point of view is that Haqparast is one of these guys that loves to just stand in the pocket and bang. But because he's a volume striker, he doesn't inflict tons of damage. He kind of just chips away at you. And Haqparast is one of these guys that doesn't do a particularly good job of putting his stamp on rounds, because he doesn't do that much damage in terms of landing like hard, impactful shots. So the most time he's just touching you and outstriking you with technique. And so this is one of those matchups where I definitely lean Haqparast, because it's a matchup between two strikers and Haqparast is the better striker. But I think this is one of those matchups where visually the rounds could appear to be very close. And I think this is one of those fights which Haqparast will probably edge, but will probably be very visually close, and he may need a little bit of help from the judges. So there's not a whole lot really to talk about with this fight. It's not a super complex fight. Two strikers. Haqparast the better striker. He'll probably edge it. But because he struggles to put his stamp on rounds, and Mullarkey is skilled enough to make this close, I wouldn't be betting Haqparast in this odds range. Too steep for me. But I do think he gets the job done. And not a whole lot to say really on that matchup. Not a whole lot to say. I think they're going to stand and bang for 3 rounds. Neither guy is particularly dangerous, and Haqparast will probably outpoint him to a decision win. In terms of the over-under, pretty likely this fight goes to a decision. If you look at Mullarkey's record, frequently fights to a decision. 3 decisions in his last 4 fights. If you look at Haqparast, big-time decisionator. His last 6 fights have gone to a decision. Very likely this one goes to a decision as well, which is why the odds are pretty steep on the fight to go to a decision. Very likely it goes to a decision, but I wouldn't be paying the price on these odds to bet that. In terms of the prop bets on this matchup, the most likely outcome for me, Haqparast by decision. As you can see, though, the odds are absolutely terrible. So if you want to bet that, go for it. But, even money for Haqparast to win by decision doesn't get me excited at all on a bet that is a highly specific outcome, especially because Haqparast doesn't do a particularly good job of putting his stamp on rounds. Now, let's break down the final fight on this card, which is going to be Andre Muniz versus Jun Yong Park. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Jun Yong Park is the favourite at average odds of around, say, 1.56, which is going to be minus 179 for an implied probability of 64%. We take a look at the odds on Muniz. He's around an average of 2.45, which is going to be plus 145 for an implied probability of 41%. So Muniz is 33 years old, 6'1" with a 78-inch reach. Jun Yong Park, 32 years old, 5'10", 73-inch reach. And so we can see both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, although Muniz does have a very nice 5-inch reach advantage, which, to be fair, I don't think will matter very much because he doesn't know how to use it. And Jun Yong Park is one of these guys with an abnormally short reach for the division, abnormally short reach for the wingspan he has, or for his height, and therefore he's kind of used to fighting guys with that kind of reach over him. And they're often much better strikers than Muniz is. So I don't think the reach is going to have too much of an impact on this fight. So classic striker versus grappler matchup. Muniz has got the base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And Jun Yong Park, very much a boxer. Very one-dimensional boxer. We've seen him use some grappling heavy game plans in recent fights. But, you know, boxing is Park's bread and butter. So if the fight stays standing, what you're generally going to see is Andre Muniz trying not to engage too much. Andre Muniz likes to conserve all the energy that he's got for grappling. So Muniz likes to maintain a really wide distance between him and his opponent. Of course, he's got that length, that reach, which will help him do that. And he likes to just kind of chip away at you from a safe distance with kicks. His boxing's not the best. Jun Yong Park is a guy that likes to come forward and fight you in a phone booth. He wants to get in close, get inside, where he can get one of his best weapons working, which is his jab. He wants to chip away at you from behind the jab, box you up, force you to exchange. Now, he may have some trouble doing that early on because Muniz does fight long. He's a big guy. He doesn't like to engage, likes to circle away from you and maintain that big safe distance. But Muniz is one of these guys that, you know, his footwork does become flatter. He slows a bit as fights wear on. So Jun Yong Park can maintain the pressure, continue coming forward to try and get inside. Eventually it'll reach the point where Muniz doesn't have the energy to circle away from him, and then Park can have a lot more success with his boxing than he may have very early in the fight. Now, in terms of grappling, this is where the fight gets very complicated, because if you look at Jun Yong Park's record, he hasn't fought any grapplers, or he hasn't fought any grapplers the level of Andre Muniz, or any grapplers that are really that skilled in a very long time. A little bit like Khalil Rountree in many ways. I feel that the matchmakers have been kind to him. Well, maybe not necessarily. Albert Duraev obviously has a base in combat sambo. He's a very good grappler, but Duraev also has very bad fight IQ and didn't try to take Jun Yong Park down in that fight. So it doesn't tell us a whole lot about Jun Yong Park's defensive wrestling. Then he fought Dennis Chulinlin, kickboxer. Joseph Holmes, bit of everything, but not a particularly good grappler. Eric Anders, bit of everything, not a particularly good grappler. Gregory Rodriguez didn't try to grapple. Taffin and Chukwi, kickboxer. John Phillips, boxer. Marc-Andre Barrio, bit of everything, well-rounded, not the best grappler. Last time he fought a decent grappler was Anthony Hernandez, all the way back in 2019, which was 4 years ago now. Got absolutely dominated, looked awful on the ground. So the tricky aspect of this fight is the last time where we've really seen Jun Yong Park's takedown offense and ground game tested was back in 2019-2020 against guys like Marc-Andre Barrio and also Anthony Hernandez. And Park's takedown offense looked absolutely terrible, and he looked like a white belt on the ground. Absolutely dreadful. He just got handled easily by Hernandez. And obviously Andre Muniz, nasty submission game, decent grappling control, high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. You know, if Muniz gets Jun Yong Park down in the first round and Park looks as bad on the ground as he did back in 2019-2020, Park could be in a lot of trouble. But we have seen big improvement to Park's offensive wrestling in recent years. We've seen him use grappling heavy game plans against guys like, Joseph Holmes, Dennis Chulinlin, which I know aren't great on the ground, but what you can see from Park is that he's made giant leaps forward in terms of his offensive wrestling. And if he's improved that much in his offensive wrestling since 2019-2020, you would assume that, logically speaking, Park has probably made good improvements to his defensive wrestling, takedown offense, submission defense as well. Now, we can't say that for sure because we haven't seen any evidence of it, but if we're dealing in most likely outcomes, that is the most likely outcome. So this is one of those matchups where, based on past performances, it's quite difficult to feel confident on Park here because of how bad he's looked on the ground last time we kind of seen him tested. But if his defensive wrestling's improved at the same rate of his offensive wrestling, I think it's going to be difficult for Muniz to get this guy down and cause him problems on the ground, because Muniz is a guy with a base in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that doesn't have the best offensive wrestling. So if Park can keep this fight standing, which logically speaking there's a reasonably good chance he can, then I think Muniz is just going to get boxed up and outpointed on the feet for 3 rounds and probably lose a decision. So Jun Yong Park is one of the most tempting bets for me this week. I'm very, very tempted to bet him. I'm probably not going to bet him because too steep of a favourite, knowing that he's looked dreadful on the ground the last time we really saw him tested, and Muniz is very dangerous on the ground. So for me, it's not that appealing to bet on a guy like Park that has potentially a huge weakness in an area that his opponent is extremely strong, especially when we can bet fighters like, you know, Lupita Godinez, Jacqueline Buckley, Benoit Saint-Denis, even Yasmin Lasindu, in a similar odds range, when each of those names are just reeled off were significantly better than the opponents they faced basically everywhere. That is certainly not the case here because of how bad Park has looked on the ground when facing decent grapplers in the past. So, you know, even though Jun Yong Park's very tempting, this way we've got to be very disciplined and very boring and just accept that while he's very likely to win, he doesn't give us the same risk to reward ratio that we can obtain if we're just a little bit more patient in waiting for, you know, those really super strong positions and those gifts from the universe to come to us, which they always do, if we're just patient enough to wait for them. And I'm sure they're going to be coming to us in live betting pretty soon as well. It's only a matter of time before we go on a monster winning run on live betting as well. It's the way it always is, or the way it always has been over the last 15 years since I've been doing this. So just have to be patient and just wait for the profits to come to us and just chill, man, and stick to the game plans and strategies that have served us so well for so long. So yeah, I hope you found that useful. If we take a look at the over-under on this one now, pretty likely the fight goes to a decision, in my opinion, just because Park's not a particularly dangerous striker, doesn't have too much power in his hands. Muniz has kind of caved in some recent fights and found himself getting finished. But I think the difference between Park and guys like Allen and Craig is that Park may not be able to make Muniz work as hard early in the fight as guys like Brendan Allen, Paul Craig did. Therefore, it increases the probability of this fight going deeper. It's just how I see it. I do quite like the over 1.5 rounds though, and I'll probably bet that myself. I'll obviously put in the Discord if we bet it. I haven't put any bets in Discord yet, but you know for a fact they're going to be coming soon to all the homies in the Discord. If you want to join the Discord, just go to my website, man, and you can find out how to join there. Just go to community, set up Discord and the Discord server. It's all on the website, link in the description below. We're having a conversation here by the looks of it about having betting accounts closed, which is obviously our biggest issue. So yeah, man, I'll catch up on that combo between John and Frozen in a bit. So yeah, man, that's it for this fight, I reckon, boys. I'll probably bet the over-under though. In terms of the props, Park to win by decision, I think, is the most likely outcome. But I don't love the odds. So props are actually a bit dead this week. Maybe go for Park to win in round 3. I mean, Muniz has been finished in the 3rd round of his last 2 fights. I could see it happening again. What are the odds? Where are the odds? There we go. Park to win in round 3. The odds are actually terrible for that bet, to be fair. So yeah, again, props looking a little bit dead. Hope you found that useful though. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next week with a banger. Pay-per-view. Leon Edwards, Colby Covington. What more could you want? What a card. Amazing. Hopefully we can make some money on that. Finish the year strong. It's been a great 2023. 2024 is going to be even better. Thank you for being here with me and watching these videos. It means a lot. Thanks for liking the videos, subscribing, and helping the channel grow, albeit very slowly. I can't blame people. They don't want to listen to some guy from the UK ramble on about fights for an hour. I don't blame him. I probably wouldn't listen to me either. So have a great weekend, guys. Hope you make loads of money. A nice one, and I'll see you all very soon for next week's video. Cheers, bye.